Hello there, it's Cassie. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today I have the My Favorite Things Flowers and Bloom card kit for 2019, and as far as whether or not it's still available as of filming, it is. So I will have all that linked down below, and I'll even have the little separate pieces linked down below. So let's go ahead and take a look at what comes in the kit. I love it when they have flower kits because they really know how to do them right, and this one is no exception. It comes with the gorgeous stamp set called Flowers in Bloom with some beautiful sentiments, and it also has the matching die to go with it. And then you're going to get some cardstock that will match really nicely with the color burst that comes in the kit. So you'll get some tropical teal, coral crush, jellybean green, black licorice, smooth white, as well as 4 sheets of the Ken Oliver watercolor paper. And I actually really enjoyed working with that watercolor paper. It's really, really nice. So you'll also get the Flower Fresh Color Burst Trio in the colors Tropical Teal, Coral Crush, and Jellybean Green. So I like how they match the My Favorite Things colors, and I'm so excited to give these a try. I had never tried them before, so I was stoked. For card number 1, I started off by cutting down some of that watercolor paper. I just cut it down into 4 pieces. They're 4 equal pieces, and they each measured 4¼ by 5½ inches. And I pulled out my Waffle Flower Media Mat, which is actually really fantastic for something like this. And I put some of that watercolor paper right on top, and I'm trying to spritz it with my water distress sprayer, which in all honesty is, I think something's wrong with mine. So I'm going to have to do some research and try to find a better water bottle because that one's just not cutting it. After spritzing some water on it, I'm tapping some of that color burst color right onto the watercolor paper, and you'll notice it's just a bunch of little granules if you've never used them before. And then I spritz a little more water on it, and you can see that there is like just different variations of color inside the color burst, which is so cool. So I'm going to try and heat this a little bit to try and capture some of the darker color along with some of that lighter color, and I will keep working it. But this color burst is so fun. I love how there's different colors of granules inside the little bottle. I don't know why I didn't pull the plug earlier and get these once before. So I decided to cut down this panel by using the Wonky Stitched Circle Die-namics. I run that through my Big Shot, and then I get this cool little panel. I'll set that off to the side, and I'm going to trim down some of that coral cardstock to make a top folding A2 size card. So I'll grab out my score buddy, and I will score that at 5½ inches, and that will make it a top folding A2 size card. The next step would be to stamp out my image. So I've put some more of that watercolor paper into my mini MISTI, and I'll pull out my flower image, and I'll set that on top, and then I'll close the door of the MISTI and pick up the stamp, and then I'll grab my magic powder bag because I plan to do some embossing, and I will just put that magic powder bag all over the front of my card. And then I'm going to ink up my stamp using some clear embossing ink, and this is from Brutus Monroe. Versamark ink would work fine too, but this is just what I had handy. So I'll ink that up pretty well, close the door of my MISTI, and then stamp out the image. And I can see in the light where I've stamped it, and I decided I don't have enough ink coverage, so I will ink it up one more time, and then I'll stamp that down once again. And that will do it for the coverage. That worked out really nicely. So I'll also grab the Raven embossing ink or embossing powder from Brutus Monroe, and this is an ultrafine powder, so it's nice for details. And I'll cover my image with that, and you can see it covered very, very nicely. Normally I don't use black embossing powder, but sometime, or in this case, I really wanted the black because sometimes those granules can stick to things, and that's why the magic powder bag is so important to use it. I'm heating this until it is smooth and melted, and you'll be able to see that in the light. The powder goes from a matte finish to a shiny finish. And now I'm going to do a little bit more with that color burst. I'm in love with this stuff. So I'm kind of just tapping the bottom. You don't want to squeeze the bottle. You will make a mess with it because a little bit goes a long way. And I'm still struggling with that water bottle. But I like the look of the variation here. And I even like how it's not entirely covered. I do grab a paintbrush and I do put some more of that color in because I did want it to be a little bit more covered than what it was. But that's also another nice thing I'll show you later where you can just watercolor with these as well. So I'll tap a little bit more, and I'm just tapping the bottom of it, not hard, not squeezing, and I'm just getting just a little bit of that powder to come out. Like I said, a little bit goes a very long way. And so then I'm going to heat set this because I really like how this ended up looking, and I want to capture that look. So I'll bring out the heat gun. And then once that's dry, I'm going to put a little bit of the green inside one of the wells of my water media mat, spritz that with some water. And this is what I'm talking about as far as you can watercolor with it. And that powder will get everywhere if you're not careful. So I've just grabbed my paintbrush and I'm going to paint that right onto the panel. And it's funny watching the video here as I'm editing. I really like the way this panel looks. Like, I almost wish I hadn't cut it down. So I'm going to have to do some more experimenting. And I've also picked it up and I'm splattering, but I'm going to have to do some more experimenting because I really like the way this panel looks, how the color just kind of comes off of the flowers like that. I heat set that because I want to make sure that's dry before I run it through my Big Shot machine with the matching dye. You definitely want to make sure that your panels are dry, otherwise you'll just tear the paper with your dyes. I'm going to tack that down with some washi tape and then run that through my Big Shot machine, which is sitting on my desk. Yes, I am bragging about that. I'm so excited to actually have room on my desk to put my die cutting machine. And that die worked great. So for the sentiment, I've pulled out some heavyweight vellum, and I am going to take my magic powder bag over the top of the vellum once I decide which stamp I want to use. And that magic powder bag will once again keep the embossing powder from sticking to places I don't want it to. I'll use that clear embossing ink once again, and then I will cover this with that Raven embossing powder. And the magic powder bag did a great job of not getting powder where I didn't want it. I'll pick up my mess and I heat set that off camera, but now I'm trying to decide where and how I want to place that onto my card. I don't want to cover too much of what I've colored, which is why I chose the vellum, but I'm really happy so far. I do cut an angle because I don't want it to go all the way across. And then I'm going to grab some liquid glue because there was definitely some warping with the amount of water that I used. The paper did warp, which is fine. Some liquid glue or even some foam tape would keep that down. And to make sure that stays in place, all of it once I get the flower tacked down also, I'm just going to stick a stamp block right on top of that just to give it a little bit of weight to keep things tacked down. And I did use my liquid glue on top of my vellum, or on the back of my vellum, to get it to stick down, and I use my finger to smear it around because if I didn't, you would see all of those glue lines. And that worked out okay. I'm grabbing some Nuvo bottle green. This is crystal drops in the color bottle green, and I'm going to put a few of those down. I thought that matched the color burst Jellybean green pretty nicely, and I'll just put several little dots of that all over that background. I do end up screwing up here. You'll see in a second. But it's an easy fix, and I didn't fix it completely this way. I just wanted to make sure that it dried. But so I'm going to go ahead and tap this down. You'll see. And I get a little aggressive with the tapping, and you see the bottom. I smeared that one. I tapped so hard that it went crazy. So in order to fix that, I'll just take one of my X-Acto knives and scrape that away. Just scrape it gently away, and you can fix it that way. And then once it's dry, I'll go over the top of it once again with my Nuvo drop just to kind of make sure that it's a circle. But that finishes off card number 1. For card number 2, I'm going to use another piece of that watercolor paper, and I am going to stamp out my flower twice onto the flower, or onto the paper, using that clear embossing ink from Brutus Monroe. Then I'm going to pull it off of there, and I'm going to cover that with my Icicle embossing powder. And this is a fine detail embossing powder, and it's clear. I could have used white, but I chose to use clear because I wanted to see how that would react with the paper or the inks. And so now that the embossing powder is smooth and melted after my heat tool, I have sprinkled some of the color burst onto the watercolor paper, and that was the color Tropical Teal. And then I'm going to put some more of the Jellybean green right into that well there, and I'm going to spritz some water all over my panel. And I could do this all day. I'm telling you, it's just beautiful. It's beautiful. And so I'll take my watercolor brush and I will move some of that around to define the flowers a little bit more, because like I said, I'm having an issue with my water spritzer. So yeah, like I said, I'll have to do some research. So if anybody has a suggestion for a good one that will actually last, let me know and put that in the comment section down below if you don't mind. Now this is not completely dry. So my blue isn't completely dry, as you can tell, so some of that green is going into the blue, and honestly, I don't mind. I did wipe away some of it and I added a little bit more blue to it, but I really don't mind how the green and the blue are mixing in some of those areas. I actually think it looks kind of cool. And I'll have a little bit more of it on this other flower as well. But where there's extra water or extra color, I just take my microfiber cloth and wipe that up. And then just put more of that color down. And like I said, it does mix a little bit in some areas, but I kind of like the look of it. And when I'm happy with how I've got some of that put down, I'm going to use my heat tool to get that heated. Now you will see the difference. Normally if I had used white embossing powder instead of clear, those lines would have been stark white, but that watercolor does kind of absorb into the paper a little bit, and so you see the outline of the flower, but it's just a little bit more magnified, a magnified sense of the color, honestly. So it's not stark white like clear white or like white embossing powder would be, but the clear is an interesting look. So I'm happy I did it. I taped down my die over the top of my images, and I'm going to run that through my Big Shot machine twice so that I can get those both cut out. I love having a matching die for this. Like I have said before, I don't always buy the matching dies because I'd rather have extra stamps, but when it comes in a kit like this, it's usually on sale, so I don't mind, and it makes me pretty happy. I've decided on the sentiment hello, and I'm just going to use some Raven ink, and I'm going to stamp down the hello right onto my cardstock, which is the white cardstock that came in the kit. And I've covered the back of my flowers with foam tape, and as also some Derice, there's like the skinny foam adhesive, so I'll have that listed down below. Those are really nice for the stems, that way I didn't have to try and really trim down some of that Scotch foam tape to try and get that to fit. And then I'll just stick my flowers onto the front of my card and then flip it over and trim off the excess. But those Derice strips are really great for tiny, intricate pieces like those stems. For a final bit of embellishment, I did grab my glitter Nuvo drops in the color Yellow Bird, and I'll put a few of those down. And I didn't get as aggressive with tapping these ones down like I did the last ones, so I don't end up with a mess, but I was pretty liberal with where I put those. And then I do grab just one of those embossing pots and tap it down gently and get those to flatten out just a little bit to make them look a little bit more like enamel dots, and that will finish off card number 2. I really do like how the clear embossing powder looks on top of this. For card number 3, I thought I'd do something a little bit different with the color bursts, so I'm just putting those into my well. And I'm going to do that with all of the colors eventually, but I'll spritz some water in there, and then I'm going to use my 1/2 inch flat silver black velvet paintbrush, and I'm just going to paint some stripes on there. And I know they're not going to be super straight. I want them to look organic. I don't want them to be perfect. So I'm just going to put 4 stripes down, and then I'll go back over them the other way because I noticed that it seemed like where I stopped, the end was a little bit thicker. So I wanted the end to be thicker on both edges, and so I let that dry, and then I decided it was a little flat, so I wanted some splatter. And so I've just picked up my brush and I'm splattering that, and I'm getting it everywhere. Thank goodness for baby wipes. But yeah, so I'm getting that everywhere, and then I'll set that off to the side once again to dry. Again, a different idea. I decided to take some of the colored cardstock that came in the kit and stamp out my images just using some Raven Detail ink, and I'm going to ink that up. And I only really want the stems, so I'm not really concerned about the top part. So I'll ink that up, and then I'll set that off to the side, and then I'll grab the coral cardstock as well, and I will ink that up. And I do want all of that. So I'm going to ink that up really well. And I end up inking it twice to make sure that I have a good crisp image. That's the beauty of the mini Misty, or a Misty in general, or any stamp positioner. And then I am going to do something different. I will take some of that watercolor, and I'm using my number 4 Simply Simmons paintbrush, and I'm just painting very lightly, not using a lot of water, because you have to keep in mind this is just cardstock. So it is not meant to hold a lot of water, or really any water at all, because if you work it too much, you will pill that paper. And that is not the goal. So my goal is just to put down a little bit of color. And the other thing you'll notice is that even though these colors are fairly concentrated, I will end up, you know, and when I first put it down, it's fairly dark, but it dries back quite a bit as well on this cardstock. So it really absorbs into the paper, and it's not like, obviously it's not like watercolor paper where it will mostly stay on top and still absorb into the paper. This is just going to absorb right into the paper. So all I'm trying to do is just add a little bit of shadowing. I'm, like I said, not using really any water other than what is in the well, and I'm just putting down that color and trying to get just a nice shadow. And so it looks pretty harsh at first. And even I was a little like, boy, that's pretty harsh. But once it starts to dry back, as you can tell on that first flower, it's a very subtle look. And I really, really like the way that looks. It's just something different. So I'll take some of that green and I'll put that in the center. And then I will let that dry. And then I'm going to run both of those through with the dye so that I have both pieces. And I'm going to take that green and I know it's crazy, but I'm going to take the green and I'm actually going to fussy cut the stems. It wasn't as hard as it sounds. It was actually really easy because they're pretty straight lines. And then I'm going to tack those down to the coral flowers just using some multimedia matte adhesive. And so that will dry matte and you won't be able to tell if it does seep out the sides. So I'm actually FaceTiming my son right now as I'm fussy cutting these out and assembling these. So it was like not a big deal at all. I really didn't mind. And I ended up really loving how the flower looked. So now that that is done, I'm going to get out my panel, or this is going to be my card base. And this is the tropical teal cardstock that came in the kit. And I just cut that down to 4 1/4 by 11 inches and then scored it at 5 1/2 inches to make a top folding A2 size card. I will stamp out my sentiment using that same Raven detail ink. I'm just using that Hello sentiment that came in the stamp set. I'll stamp that down, and then I'm going to start adhering all of my pieces. I did use some liquid glue to adhere my watercolor piece to my card base, and then I'm going to cover the back of my flower with some foam tape. And I did use the Doris foam strips once again just on the stems because they were perfect. And I will have those listed down below because those are pretty awesome. I love those things. So I'll peel off all the backing paper on my flower, and then I will start to position my flower. This is a very simple card really, and it didn't actually take that much time. And then I will flip that over, trim off the excess, and that's going to finish off card number 3. And I like the way this looks. It's a little bit different, but it's a cool look. For my 4th and final card, I'm going to pull out some Gumdrop Green, My Favorite Things ink. I'm going to stamp that down all over the background of my card base. So this is my card base. It is the green that came in the kit. This was the Jellybean green, and I just stamped that using my stamp platform. And then I'm going to move that cardstock over a little bit, and I'm going to stamp it again. So I wanted that flower to be all over that background. And I'm just using my magnet to keep everything in place, ink up my stamp once again, and then I'll stamp that down. And that obviously, you know, the Gumdrop Green isn't the exact same color as the Jellybean Green, but I like the variation in the color. I think it looks pretty nice. I'm going to grab out one more piece of that watercolor cardstock, and I'm going to ink up my stamp once again. After I cover my watercolor paper with my magic powder bag, because I do plan to do some embossing on this one once again, I just love the look. But this time I'm going to stamp this with my VersaFine Onyx Black ink. I'll stamp that out and make sure that I have a good crisp image. And when I'm happy with it, because I'll ink it up again, I'm then going to cover it with some clear embossing powder this time. And so I like using black, and I do like using clear. The difference with the clear is that you won't, even if it does get in different places, you're not going to see that so much. But I like the black because it really gives your image a very crisp, dark black image. So I could compare the first one with this one that the first one I used black embossing powder, and this one I used clear embossing powder. I could compare the two, and you will definitely see if you hold them up to each other that the one with the black is much darker. This, I mean, it works fine. It's the same. It's not a big deal, and you don't even have to emboss it. Moving on, I meant for this to be some clear, clean water, but my brush still had a little bit of blue in it. But that's okay because I did want my flowers to be blue. So I wet it down first, and now I'm tapping the powder into it to see the reaction of that. And you can see that it already starts to spread. I probably put a little too much powder, but I like the dark look. And I'm going to take my water brush and I'm going to manipulate some of that color and get it to move just a little bit into some of the other petals so that it doesn't have such a spotted look, although I like that look too. And this is funny because you could tell I'm FaceTiming my son. I wanted to show him what I was working on, so he's probably one of my biggest fans, him and my mom. And so back to it, I just set him off to the side, and I'll just keep talking and painting and working that color burst into the paper. And I do set it off to the side to dry. I wanted to see if I could get it to dry kind of on its own and what kind of a look that would give. And I think this is pretty. You can tell there's a little bit darker areas and some lighter areas. And then I will run that through with the matching dye just to get my flowers all cut out. And I try to add some of the coral to the center, but I had some blue granules on there that I didn't even see. And so every time I tried to get that coral on there, it just got dark. So I thought, well, forget it. It is what it is. Now that I've decided what sentiment I want to use, I grab my magic powder bag once again, and I cover the top corner, the top left corner, and then I'm going to cover my sentiment with some clear embossing ink, stamp that down, and cover that with that white embossing powder. And then I'll heat set that till that is smooth and melted. I thought the white on that would stand out nicely. At first I thought about using the vellum once again, but I like the white. I'll cover the back of my flowers with some liquid glue and then just adhere that down. And then for a final bit of embellishment, I do end up grabbing some Nuvo crystal drops in the color Morning Dew, which isn't a color. It looks like it is, but it will dry completely clear. So it'll look like some dewdrops on there, which is kind of fun, especially when you're dealing with flowers. And I'm fairly liberal with those. And I do tap those down, once again, a little less aggressively than the first time. But clearly I'm obsessed with Nuvo drops. I love the look of them. I think they're fun. It's an easy embellishment to add. And that will finish off card number 4. So let's go ahead and take a look at the 4 cards that I made today. This was a very fun kit. I would definitely say jump on it if you can, because I don't think it's going to last long. I would love to know which of these cards was your favorite, so leave that in the comment section down below. And like this video if you liked it, and subscribe if you haven't already done so. And as always, thank you so much for stopping by.